What is going on, you guys? Keith Carnes here, bringing you another video pertaining to Chris Benoit, the Benoit tragedy. And of course, I have done this before, talking about different aspects of Benoit. I talked about his brain damage facts, just to kind of help spread the word of Chris Benoit's brain damage. And then I also did a conspiracy episode on Chris Benoit, where the conspiracy was that people believe that Chris Benoit was murdered, which brings me to this video here. This was actually a requested topic by a user named TopSlimeSam. I've been having a very interesting and fun discussion with this person for a little while about Chris Benoit, and we have a long discussion, and I just want to thank you personally. I'm just going to call you Sam. Sam, for giving me this idea and for the intriguing conversation. I'm enjoying it. So he wanted me to make a video talking about why I don't think Chris Benoit was murdered, because some people think that there was a reason for Chris Benoit to be murdered, and people also believe that they even have an idea of who murdered Chris Benoit. So we're going to get into all that right now. So first off, the reason I don't think I'm going to start with the reason I don't think Chris Benoit was murdered, and then I'm going to talk about pretty much the prime suspect to all the conspiracy theories out there and why that's completely ridiculous as well. So to start things off, we're going to go ahead and clear the air on why I think that Chris Benoit was completely responsible for the crimes, as in terms of he did the crimes. I'm not saying he was mentally responsible. I've stated many times in the past that I don't blame Chris Benoit, that I don't feel that Chris Benoit should be fairly blamed. I don't think that the blame should be casted on somebody with extreme, extensive brain damage. I don't care what anybody else says. The facts are the facts. It was released from a from a research facility that specializes in brain concussions and all that other stuff. The WWE has since teamed up with these specialists to prevent CTE, which is what Chris Benoit was suffering from. And if WWE is teaming up with them, obviously they're doing something right to help prevent this horrific tragedy from ever happening again. So, the reason I don't think that Chris Benoit was murdered is simply because nobody had a motive, nobody had any real reason to kill Chris Benoit. Now, some people could argue and say, well, you know, Chris was famous, and maybe somebody just didn't like him and decided, hey, I'm going to kill this guy and frame him for, you know, frame him for the murder, make it look like he killed his family and then committed suicide, and then I'm going to get away with it. Well, there's multiple problems with that. First and foremost, Chris Benoit was not a small little vulnerable person. Chris Benoit was he was the same height as me. He was 5'10", so he wasn't the tallest guy in the world, but Chris Benoit weighed 225 pounds or so. He was billed as he might have been a little heavier, and he was extremely strong. I mean, if you look at the physique of Chris Benoit, which you should be familiar with how he looked. If you're watching this, you're obviously either a Chris Benoit fan or at least a wrestling fan, and you're very well aware of who Chris Benoit was. This was not a guy that had a problem with strength. I mean, this guy was extremely strong. This guy was able to suplex people like they were little rag dolls, and I just don't feel or see how somebody could have broken into the house and overpowered Chris. And now, people also argue and say, well, maybe there was more than one killer. Well, that still doesn't add up, though, because there would have definitely been a struggle. I mean, you got to think, Chris Benoit's not going to just sit by and say, oh, they're going to murder me, okay, fuck it. You know, I mean, he's obviously going to fight back. He's going to, the first thing in any man's mind that has a kid or kids and has a wife, they're going to instantly go into protect mode. They're instantly, and their adrenaline's going to fly up, and they're going to run to protect their family. And Chris, you know, from what people said, was very proud of his family. He was extremely close to his son Daniel, who he killed, and he was extremely loving about his family. He was very proud of his family. He hated being away from them. This was said by many different people when the tragedy happened, people that were around Chris on a daily basis. So, you know, I don't believe that if, you know, intruders has somehow gone into the house, were able to overpower Chris. I don't believe that part at all. But let's just say, you know, for argument's sake, let's just say that Chris actually did get overpowered, and what people say is true, and that it was a frame. Well, I'll tell you what, those are some of the best murderers I have ever seen, because they were able to stage it to make it look like absolutely nobody was in there. And no matter how you look at it, there's no way that they could have done that without getting away. I mean, there would have been some kind of an evidence done. I'm sure they took print analysis from the bodies. I'm sure they took it from the Bibles that were placed next to Nancy and Daniel. I'm sure that they did all kinds of tests and everything like that. Maybe looked for some blood splatter, which obviously there wasn't. And there just wasn't. There was just no sign of a struggle. And saying that Chris Benoit was murdered and that there was an intruder or more than one intruder, I just don't feel that. I just don't see any evidence that adds up to that. You know, I've seen some of the crime scene photos, not of the bodies, of course, but there are some that are relatively easy to find that were broadcast on the news. And there is, the house is in complete order. It's not in disarray. It's complete order. The house looks very, very nice. Everything is still in very great condition. Even the room where he killed his son, the room is still in very, very nice condition. There wasn't a struggle. There's not a bunch of crazy stuff going on in the room. All of Daniel's toys and stuff were in perfect order and condition. They were all just put where they were probably obviously left last by the boy. And, you know, the weight room that Chris, we haven't really seen much of that, but it looked like it was pretty much left alone. And the and the room where Nancy was supposedly killed, same thing there. Even though that was a struggle between her and Chris, it was still in a pretty, you know, untouched manner. It was still pretty good. So, in my opinion, I just don't see or think that there's anything to really logically or realistically point to Chris being murdered. I just don't feel that there's anything to support that, and I have never believed that myself. Now, some people, let's go on to the second part of this video, some people actually believe that Chris was murdered, so I can't even say it without laughing because it's just so ridiculous, by fellow wrestler, former wrestler now, Kevin Sullivan, who worked for the WCW and actually had like a Satanist gimmick. And some people are interpreting that he was a Satanist in real life and that, you know, he told Chris Benoit, "I will kill you," which maybe he did, but people say crazy shit when they're mad. I mean, Chris did steal the guy's wife from him, Nancy. Nancy was married to Kevin Sullivan first. She left Kevin Sullivan when... Okay, this is kind of messed up, so I'm going to explain this to you really briefly. Is what happened was, Kevin Sullivan was... I don't know if he was actually married to Nancy. I think he was. Yeah, he was. I'm pretty sure. So he was married to Nancy, who would later be married to Chris Benoit. But Nancy and Kevin Sullivan were married. Kevin Sullivan was in charge of kind of like booking and creating storylines for WCW, so what did they do? Kevin Sullivan decided that she would have an affair with Chris Benoit, and that would create a feud between Sullivan and Benoit. Well, unfortunately for Sullivan, it happened in real life, and she actually started having an affair with Chris and ended up leaving Kevin Sullivan for Chris Benoit. So, and obviously, unfortunately for her later on, that would have been a bad choice. So, a lot of people think that, you know, he got his revenge. It was exactly 10 years. So that would have been 1997 when that all happened. And obviously the tragedy happened in 2007. So it was like 10 years after the divorce and after she left him for Chris, and he reportedly told Chris, "I'm going to kill you." I'm sure he did. They probably got in a huge fight, maybe even got in a fist fight. I mean, the guy stole the guy's wife. I mean, no matter how you look at that, that's fucked up. And they were having an affair, which is fucked up too. So I'm sure Kevin Sullivan said a lot of really hateful stuff towards them. But do I think it was a serious threat? Absolutely not. Do I think that Kevin Sullivan had anything to do with Chris dying or even killing Nancy and Daniel? Absolutely not. I don't think so. I think he was just as stunned as we were. It's probably still surreal to him to know that he was wrapped up with them in the late 90s, when that whole thing happened with her and Chris having an affair behind his back. But, you know, hey, you know, it is what it is. You know, it's just the way things worked out. But I don't think that Chris was murdered. You know, I'm very confident in saying that he wasn't. I just think my theory is true. Either Chris suffered a blackout and killed them, or he was just so out of his mind, which we have plenty of proof and plenty of things to back it up, that Chris was delusional and suffering from a level of even dementia, that he probably thought that killing them was his best option. And obviously that's what he did. It's very, very sad. It's very, very unfortunate, but Chris Benoit was not murdered. Anyway, guys, this is C. Keith Carnes. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it cleared some stuff up if you're a little confused about the case. I will see you guys in the next. Take it easy, and thank you for watching.